Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Slippery Creatures by K.J. Charles. Narrated by Cornell Collins. Chapter 1. Will Darling was outnumbered by books. It hadn't always felt this way. When he'd first visited his uncle at Darling's Used and Antiquarian, he'd simply thought, that's a lot of books. And when he'd started helping here, they were just work. As he took over the running of the place in his uncle's last illness, though, he became increasingly aware of them looming around him, full of knowledge and secrets and lies. So much that when Uncle William had died, Will remembered an ancient piece of lore about bees, and he'd cleared his throat and told the books, he's gone. He was dead, and Will, his sole heir, had inherited Darling's Used and Antiquarian, the premises on May's Buildings off St. Martin's Lane, the goodwill, such as it was, and the stock. He was master of an entire building, with a shop floor, 2 upstairs rooms, and a cubbyhole at the ground floor back, which was all the space his uncle had allowed for human life. He'd have Uncle William's savings, too, once probate had been sorted out. And he owned a lot of books, although just now and then, when it got dark and the shelves loomed over him, he got the feeling that they owned him. He occupied some of the extremely long periods when nobody came into the shop by trying to calculate how many volumes his uncle had stuck him with, and had concluded it could easily be 40,000. He had yet to find an inventory, and was increasingly convinced the old bugger had kept his records in his head. So here he was, at the shop desk, with books double-stacked in the floor-to-ceiling shelves that turned the room into a maze, books piled on every flat surface and against every vertical one, books half obscuring the windows. Bloody books. The place reeked of old paper over the fainter odours of damp, dust, and rodents. He'd put down traps, checked the walls, and taken a broom to what floor was visible, as well as to the accumulating cobwebs on the fog-stained ceiling. It had had very little effect. He'd probably get used to the smell of second-hand books one day, just stop noticing it, and then he'd be doomed. On that gloomy thought, he swung his feet up onto his desk and leaned back in his chair. Uncle William had spent good money on this chair once, and though the red leather was cracked, it was still comfortable. That was good enough for Will. He was damned lucky to be here, even if he lived in danger of being crushed by a book landslide. Will had gone to the war at 18, and come back 5 years later to find himself useless and unwanted. In Flanders he'd been a grizzled veteran, a fount of professional expertise who knew the ropes and had seen it all. Back in Blighty he'd become a young man again, one with little training and no experience. He'd been apprenticed to a joiner before the war, but that felt like decades ago. All he was good at now was killing people, which was discouraged. Britain was full of men like him, trying to find something to do in a country that had managed perfectly well without them. He'd gone home first, but his mother had died from the Spanish flu while he'd waited to be demobbed, and Northamptonshire was full of hollowed-out villages and hollow-eyed men. So, like everyone else, he'd come to London to look for work, paying his way with his war gratuity and the little his mother had left him. He'd taken whatever jobs he could find, tramped the streets for hours making increasingly desperate applications, and realized with slow-mounting fear as the months passed that his slide into poverty was unstoppable, no matter how willing he was to work. He'd written to his unknown uncle when he'd reached the stage of rationing himself to 1 meal a day, and calculating when his shoe leather would wear quite through. He hadn't expected an answer, let alone a welcome. It had been a last throw of the dice, and he'd rolled a double 6. Uncle William had welcomed him as long-lost family, which alone would have made Will weak with thankfulness. But far more, he'd given him money and let him work to earn it. Will wouldn't have been able to repay that debt of gratitude in years. In the event, he'd only had a couple of months before the old man passed on.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?